when there was a lot of political discussion. So much happened in the world, so it was an inspiring time to be young.
Yeah.
It's not the 1870s, but the 1970s.
But the world you're describing is a world of fire, of the dictatorship, Vietnam, apartheid, and so on. And it's easy then to say that it was easier, perhaps, joining politics than it is today. And then at the same time, when you look at Afghanistan, you see what is happening in Syria, you see the migration, we also see what is happening, in Burma. There's a lot of conflict unresolved in Africa, and we today see in Nicaragua the demonstrations and fighting for freedom as well. How come that people doesn't seem to look at politics as the alternative for change? In the same way that perhaps you did, or as you joined political forces around that time. What is it that has changed in society, or has politics changed?
I think, first of all, at that time, the world was bipolar. You have two clear poles. So you were on one side or another, or sometimes some people in the middle, but it was so clear what was going on that but some people will feel closer to one place to another and felt they need to contribute. But I have an opinion that maybe does not represent what happens in Sweden, but what I've seen in Latin America, but I have seen it also in Europe, in some countries. I think it's a universal trend that people is like disappointed of politics. That we are having some crisis on democracy, how people feel that democracy is, because democracy is not only about voting it's important to vote. It's very important to vote, and to have good people elected that will represent you and that will make your dreams fulfill to advance. But it's not only about voting, it's also about people feeling democracy every day in their lives and how democracy really improves their lives. When people feel that politics is not improving their lives, they start feeling not interested in voting either, that start not believing. I think most of the parties have gone through a big analysis of what's going on. We have so many other actors today. Through the social networks, people get information, fake news many times, information, so they don't need to go to a party or to a meeting. Because for us, it was very important to have a meeting in some place. Now people get along through WhatsApp, through other. So I think the rules have changed, and politicians and political parties need to think how we adjust to these changes, how we continue offering solutions, strategies, possibilities, opportunities to people that they feel attracted to. And I think the world is moving too fast, and not always we are able to go in the same velocity. It's much more than that, just to mention some of the issues.
I think that globalization brought prosperity and riches to groups of people, and others felt totally left behind.
Yeah.
And what we see now is maybe a new fight between good and evil. And I must say that reading the article today in today's paper about Viktor Orban and also the Italian Prime Minister declaring war against, or a fight against the democratic and leftist forces in this world, I just say bring it on, because we are it's a real attack on democracy and human rights, and we see for the first time in decades, we see that those countries who are moving in an autocratic way, with autocrats leading their countries, the number of those countries is higher than the ones who move towards democracy. Because for many years we saw, of course, the African countries rising to democracy with elections and starting to build a middle class and providing sort of services. But there is a deep mistrust in politicians, and I think it has to do with making sure that we close those gaps between groups of people, that we continue with reforms that will gain everybody and create societies that are for everybody. And this is what I think we saw also in the US, and put Trump to power. And what they do now is that they make sure that everything is just making sure that they can stay in power. And if it means putting your opponents and the opposition in prison, they will. So it has come back, you know, that they put them in prison or they close down free and independent media. And I think that this is so dangerous, and we have to look up. And I think now the most difficult, but also the most demanding and the most important task for us is to fight for democracy. Also for our foreign policy for the next 4 years, we have to be to fight for democracy and for human rights.
I completely agree. I think democracy is under threat, under big threat, because you see sometimes some people were elected, but after 20 years they continue there, and they want to maintain in power because there's corruption too in many countries of the world. So they don't want it moved, you know. So we need to fight corruption. We need to ensure free elections so people can really feel that they elected the ones who represent them. But also I think human rights are under big threat. That's why I would say my next job won't be an easy one, you know, because even we have just knew, I mean, on Friday, that the US decided not to fund anymore the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. So it's multilateralism. That has been, it's not perfect, nothing is perfect. Democracy is not perfect. No country is perfect. But, I mean, even though we always thought that Sweden was almost perfection, I have to say, and for us it's still a role model in many things. It's interesting because when you listen that some people believe that Sweden is not in a well position for, I mean, you have taken for granted, many people have taken for granted what is not to be taken for granted. It has been built by people who have been ensuring to have a welfare state, to open spaces to everyone, to give opportunities, to have more gender rights, etc. I mean, you might not have solved everything, because no country solves everything, and you always have challenges. But the Nordic countries and Sweden, for us, are role models that we want to follow. And of course, every country has its own depths and its own challenges. But I think the world we live in, with the discussion on the importance of multilateralism in trying to be attacked by many fronts, is very complicated. And as you said, we need to fight for that. We need to ensure that national and foreign policy really represent the real defense of real democracy and human rights.
We are so happy that Michelle came to Sweden, because we also want to say from this government that we will back her up. We will be a friend and an ally in her important and difficult job. And we will also have to look at ways to finance and compensate for the US, as we've done in other areas as well, and to help you so that you can do your job. So
both of you are political leaders, former president, former vice president of the EU Commission, which have dealt with all political issues on the table, but also the issue of gender equality. And that is as much as my struggle as it is your struggle. But what is your experience of being politicians fighting for gender equality, and how does it come that we still is rejecting half of the world's population equal rights? And what do you see as the origin of this resistance? Which is, I guess, a male resistance. How would you exemplify it, and what do you think are the ways to tackle it? You launched a feminist foreign policy, and you've been leading, but what is the underneath?
I think you can start, Margot, if you want.
I think we got very much the same experience when we were at the same time at the UN, and I must say that changed very much almost my life, because I saw some of the worst things that really, as I've said many times, that left me with a heavier heart, but paradoxically also with more hope for the future. Because some of these instances in war and conflict where sexual violence is used, and you think, how can somebody even do this? And why is it that women are always the target? Women's bodies, how they dress, how they behave. Women, they have become the battlefield, or rape has been also become a weapon of war. So it was the most horrible things that made us cry often, even in my team afterwards. and we listened to those stories, but they all sent the same message. We are not only victims. We also really want to be part of shaping our own country, our own future, our society, and please count on us and make sure that we have a voice. So to me, it was that was a fantastic chance to actually, as a foreign minister, declare a feminist foreign policy. And I have not regretted that one moment, even for choosing a rather provocative word to call it a feminist foreign policy, because it has a negative connotation in some countries where it is seen as very controversial. But it gave us a chance to say what that is, to define that we think that women and men should have the same rights and the same duties and the same possibilities in every society. And we used the 3 R's as the parameters. We said, through our embassies around the world, let's look at, do women and girls enjoy the same rights, legal and human rights? Are they represented? Do they have a voice? Are they where important decisions are being made? And thirdly, what about resources? Do budgetary and other resources also go to the needs of girls and women? And it became very practical. It's really a very practical tool. So you just check. Are women allowed to open a bank account? Do they have the right to get an education? Are they discriminated against on the labor market? What about, are they there in parliament? Are they there as presidents or ministers or members of other boards? And thirdly also, what about, do we have statistics that show where the money goes? Can we actually know how much money goes to the needs of women and girls and how much goes to the needs of men? So, but also that this is a matter, it's not a women's issue, it's a peace and security issue. Because there will never be peace anywhere if you don't involve women. If they're not there to negotiate peace, to keep peace, to be peacekeepers throughout, then it will not be a long-lasting peace. And this we know for sure. We know from experience and research. So to me, it's simple. It's also a matter of peace and security.
And I have to say, because the post that you were having there was a very difficult one, because you were a special envoy for women in conflict, and women in conflict, as you have mentioned, were treated badly, raped so much, and it was a very difficult thing, and you were very courageous and very brave, because you step out. You step out, you were the voice of the ones who didn't have voice. And as you said, I met a lot of survivors, and they have also this activity. I'm not a victim. I might have survived, but mainly I'm a fighter. And I think that gives you strength, but it's terrible, the kind of thing you told me once that you had to deal with. I think that if the foreign policy of Sweden is mentioned like a feminist, I would say that many things happen because we still have using the feminist word, patriarchal culture, you know, where men the way people believes that power should reside in men, essentially, where women in many places in the world are seen as citizens of second class, or discuss their competence. For example, every time you discuss about quotas for parliament or whatever, the typical discussion will be, are they competent? Do they have merit? And I have them, well, are all men competent to go in parliament? Are all men competent because they're men? It's not a gender issue. You have great women and great men. So there is this culture that many times is invisible. It's being called the invisible bias, you know? Because people they're not aware they are so machist. There's so much sexism. And in many political parties it happened. Well, the Socialist Party of Chile has declared itself this year feminist. I applaud that, but I have to say, in Spanish we say, del dicho al hecho hay un gran trecho. That means from the saying to the reality, it takes a long way to work on that. But I think it's a good definition. So you can work on trying to identify those invisible bias, trying to support and strengthen more women in decision-making position, to try to, well, we did a lot of changes in We changed the electoral law. We included quota of candidates. We included parties will have 10% of their money for strengthening women's leadership so they can become candidates, so they can become whatever they want to become in politics. We strengthened all the opportunities for entrepreneurs. And there was this stupid thing, you know, all the studies of the world, but of course in Chile, show that women, when you give them a credit, they pay it. They pay it, they are good creditors. And then they don't receive credits, or they are required so huge amount of things because they're women. So there is a lot of inequalities between men and women. They still have salary gaps, even though the bill of new constitution that I sent to the Congress, we were trying that there will be no difference salary when they do the same job, for example. Of course, in the public sector we didn't have the problem. There was same salary, same job, same salary. But the private sector, the capacity of negotiating of women was less stronger than men. So I think there's a lot of reasons. And you know, there are some this invisible bias. Let me tell you a story. It's in a magazine called Harvard Business Review. There was this big company, Deloitte, I think it is. They decided that they want to have more women in, you know, important positions. So after a year, they had no result. Next year, they continued discussing, and then what happens? There was this position, and two people applied to it, a man and a woman. And there was this interview. They had great performance before, both of them. The interview was rigorous, not that good, both of them, but the panel conclusion was, in the case of the women, she was great performance, the interview was not good, too good, she's insecure. In the case of the man, they said, he had great performance, the interview was not so good, he has potential. So that view, it's so, but that's, you know, it's there, but people don't realize. And when I've been having activities in Chile with many different groups, I said, look at your invisible